focus as well. I did want to update you on Henrietta. She is 99 3/4. The 3/4 is important as we get older. She's going to be celebrating her 100th birthday in May, and we're dragging her to Washington to do another screening and have a birthday party. And I say dragging because she once told me that anyone who celebrates their birthday after they turn 50 should be institutionalized. And anytime I've risked sitting next to her when we're watching the film, she really doesn't like that Skype birthday scene, and she'll kick me. And literally, I have bruises on my legs, so I know to sit here and I place her here. I also wanted to just give a little background on Roman Macaya, who's the ambassador. He's the Costa Rican ambassador to Washington. He's a scientist, biologist, and his grandfather fought with Pepe and the revolutionary forces. And when I asked the ambassador, when we were recording his message, I said, you know, how does a scientist become an ambassador to Washington? It's not quite the straight trajectory. And he said, run for president and lose. So that's how he became ambassador. He's a great guy, and he offered to do this because I think it's really important to the Costa Ricans, it's important to us too, but he said it so eloquently when he felt that this film is giving them a little bit of their history back, a piece of their history. And for me, I felt it was equally important that we know that a local heroine, a woman, helped shape a country, even though she never changed her style. She may have changed a nation and really changed the face of Central America. Costa Rica is the longest standing democracy in Central America right now. And it was Henrietta that was by Pepe's side and was the one who helped shape the ideals and the values and create a constitution that became a country that was based on laws, not the rule of men. And that was what is the most important kind of legacy of Pepe and Henrietta, is this constitution, and is really the sense of the country identifying themselves by their abandonment and abolishing the military. If anyone hears anything about Costa Rica, it's usually that they don't have a standing military. And they have been able to translate that into a dividend that's really worked for them. Socially, their literacy rate is higher than our own. Last I checked, it was almost 98%, and ours is hovering around 86%. And so they've really turned the money that used to go into the military and invested it in people and in nature and conservation, and that's paid off for them to then kind of create this narrative of being a small country with big ideas. So on that, I did want to open it up here. I'm curious in this group, how many people have gone to Costa Rica? Wow, a lot. And how many of you knew there was an American First Lady? That's amazing, and we don't know it here, and they didn't know it in Costa Rica either until she published her autobiography, and the story became more and more known. See a question back there.
I had two questions. One, how did you become a Muslim? Secondly, how old was she when she left?
How old was she when what?
When she left him.
When she left Pepe. Okay, so two questions. How did I first come across this story? And how old was Henrietta when she left Pepe? I was doing a lot of work, commissioned work, for the Inter-American Development Bank. It's very hard to be a documentary filmmaker. My usual line is that it's the fastest way into poverty. And so generally, you need to do commissioned work alongside your passion projects. And so I was doing a piece on domestic violence in Latin America, and I met Henrietta's daughter, and we had a long trek to Chile, and she handed me Henrietta's manuscript. And when I first read, 10 pages, it just jumped off the page. I mean, this young woman meets a mysterious guy with piercing blue eyes, and he proposes to her up a volcano, and she says yes as she's turning and looking into the smoldering crater. I felt like you can't make this stuff up. But what really struck me is it was the first time that I had read an account of a revolution or a war, civil war, through the perspective of a woman. And I was fascinated that this was a whole different lens. And she was that rare eyewitness that spoke in a plain view way of a hugely transformative moment in history. So that's what caught my attention. And when she left Pepe and left Costa Rica, she was 29 years old. So she was still very young. And it was a very difficult transition. I mean, if you can imagine in the early 50s, to leave being First Lady, coming back to Alabama with 2 kids in tow, she was a pariah. But she's the type of woman that refuses to let others define her and is insistent on defining herself. And I think that that's the mantra that has kind of sustained her over all these years. She also has these great gems. She's full of wisdom and wit. She'll say that you're never too young to change the world or too old to try. And she keeps at it. She's still working part-time, twice a week at the magazine that she helped start. And she's still out there fighting, active. She was the first one at the polls for the recent special Senate race in Alabama, and continues to read the New York Times and stays dynamic. In fact, half the time I feel like a real slacker next to her because she's got such a busy social calendar. I feel like I'm a slug, that I don't know what I'm doing with my own life. And a couple months ago when I was trying to get in touch with her, and she wasn't answering emails or text or phone, and I started to get worried that something happened. I called her daughter and I found out that she was at a dude ranch. Go figure. Anyway, any other questions? Yes.
Has she ever tried to remarry or thought about it?
She did remarry. She re-met, I should say, her high school sweetheart. And at the age of 40, she remarried Dr. Hugh McGuire. And Dr. McGuire was known in Montgomery because he had the only integrated waiting room. He was a pediatrician. And she was also very active with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And only after I made this film, because she's very cagey about boasting or talking about her life or what she's done, I found out that she was also involved in the bus boycott, and that she had met Rosa Parks, and she was actually one of the drivers that took different individuals to work and was driving them and doing carpool during that period. Other questions? Yes.
Did you have to talk her into making the film, or was she just ready to do it?
A little of both. Everyone heard the question of whether I had to talk her into it. She had just written her autobiography, and so she was finally coming to terms that she felt she wanted the historical record to at least reflect what she was involved in and how she contributed. But it took a little, cajoling to try to tell her that I was going to be following her around for a while. And that while turned into 6 years, which is the average of what it takes to make a documentary film. And sometimes I felt like she wanted to just swat me away like a fly and say, "Are you still here? Are you still following me?" And at one point she said, "Can't you just make it up? I'm tired of this already." But she was a good sport. And one other story I want to share is when we premiered this film in San Jose, she still likes to ride Harleys. And so we arranged to have her not just come to the theater in a Harley, but she came into the theater in a Harley. So it was one of those old 1930s style theaters, which had a huge stage pit here so that we could actually bring a motorcycle into the theater. My husband, who's sitting right here, was terrified that we were going to asphyxiate people because the exhaust, was just pouring out of this circa 1940s bicycle. And she threatened that she was going to wear a fake beard. She didn't do that, but she did come in a black leather jacket and white lace gloves. And it was a hoot. There was a huge standing ovation when she came in. She was on the back, she wasn't driving it. But she's just still that way, loves to have fun, be spirited, and just live in the moment. Yes?
I was born in Costa Rica.
Bienvenidos.
And thank you indeed for bringing that history back to the film. Actually, at the end, brought me to tears when that man says that at the university he had heard, was there a revolution or not? And I had heard that question myself, because one time I took a course from 1948 for La Revolución del 48. And when that man said that before 1948, when a child was born, the question was, nació un nuevo peoncito, a new little peon has been born. And that before 1948, the country has produced, or the poor people, los labriegos sencillos, have become the doctors, the lawyers, and so forth. And I am a direct product of that, because my parents did not finish elementary school. I have 3 siblings, and all of us have doctorate degrees.
Thank you for sharing that. I have a question for you. Had you heard of Henrietta? Had you heard of her story or Pepe's first wife?
I never heard about his first wife. I knew about his
Doña Karen. Yeah.
nothing about Henrietta until I saw the name of the movie, the pamphlet that I got about.
Wow. I think you'd also find it interesting that the production team was made up half of Costa Ricans and half of Americans. And it really helped, I think, the production because we both have different frames of reference that we brought to the film. And there were times when, for example, musically, we thought we had captured the sound of Limon. We thought Limon was a Caribbean port. I understood it had kind of this Caribbean sound. And our sound engineer, when we were mixing the film, said, that doesn't sound like Limon at all. And I said, really? I mean, this is the kind of music I thought came from this particular area. And he said, yeah. And he grabbed his guitar and to the picture started strumming the music. He said, this is Limon. And it was just opportunities like that, or when we were showing the demonstrations, the black and white footage, that archival footage was silent. And at first, the sound effects that we combined with that footage, you could hear English words piercing through the protests. And our Costa Rican crew said, you can't have English in these demonstrations and protests. It has to be in Spanish. And it has to not just be in contemporary Spanish, it has to be in the Spanish that they spoke at that time. And so we actually spent a day, we had cast 12 actors from the University of Costa Rica and actually recreated the protests, the demonstrations. At one point, someone came around the corner as we were screaming and shouting, and it's like, what's going on here? Actually thought that there was a demonstration, but it just showed me that certain things that we kind of took for granted or thought we could, quote, get away with, it was the Costa Rican crew that kind of kept us honest. And the most meaningful moment for me when we were in one of those extended, long marathon audio nights, was when my audio engineer, it was after a 12-hour session, and I think all of us were about to fall into the consoles. We were so exhausted. And I started apologizing, and he said, no sorries necessary. I am so proud that I can tell my daughter I worked on this film and that I've learned my own history. And so that kind of sentiment just gave me chills, because I realized that the crew that I was working with wasn't just working because it was another gig, but this was something that was in their hearts, and this was something that they felt passionate about. More questions? I thought I saw something here. Yeah.
What did the kids and grandkids get up to?
They've got quite a dynasty. Henrietta's daughter, Mooney Figueres, became the Costa Rican ambassador to Washington. Her son Henrietta's son started a restaurant and also is a business entrepreneur. Their grandchildren are attorneys. One of the grandsons started the first assisted living facility in Costa Rica. And so they're very involved in public service and politics. So they continue to be a family that is dedicated both to the country beyond a personal way, but they see it as their civic duty. Okay, this is the last question.
Are some of the children that appeared from the birthday scene still in Costa Rica?
Yes, most of the children are. Also, who you saw in the birthday scene is their stepfamily. As it was mentioned, Pepe remarried, and it happened to be that he married another American, which is interesting. One of those daughters, which is a step-sister to Mooney, is Cristina Figueres, and you may know her name because she was head of the Paris Climate Talk and the negotiations in Paris over climate change. But most of them live in Costa Rica. Mooney came to Washington and stayed on after she was ambassador, but most of her family lives in Costa Rica. So she has this big extended family that's in Costa Rica and now all over, actually, Latin America. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions, for being such a great audience.
And thank you, Andrea, for your time. I appreciate your film. Thank you.
Oh, Andrea, they can buy books outside.
Oh, I forgot one thing. I'm sorry. I always forget to put my pitches in. There are books outside, Henrietta's autobiography, DVDs, CDs of the soundtrack, free bookmarks if you'd like to take those with you, a couple pins I have left, Costa Rican friendship pins, US and Costa Rican flags, and the film will be on public television on March 25th at 9 p.m. On the Real South series. So please tell your friends and colleagues and family to watch First Lady of the Revolution. Thank you.